On this week's Political Figure episode, we've got the guy whose last name looks like it could be something on a sketchy menu from a Mediterranean food truck, Douglas Lee Lamalfa. The Dougly Llama was born July 2nd, 1960 in Butte County, California. Maybe Butte County, it could go either way. The son of rice farmers, he went to Briggs High School and then would go on to graduate from California Polytechnic with a degree in agriculture business. He'd then use his agricultural business degree to take over the family farm. But apparently, running a big rice farming operation is just a part-time job, because by 2002, old Doug was bored and decided he was going to take up the hobby of trying to make California a worse place to live by running for state legislature. Once elected to the California Assembly, the first thing he did was support Prop 209 to repeal affirmative action in the state. Then he worked hard on getting Prop 22 passed, which outlawed same-sex marriage. Then the California Supreme Court was like, that ain't gonna fly there, buddy. Then after Prop 22 got overturned, he worked on Prop 8, which overturned the court's overturning of Prop 22, urging voters to approve Prop 8 so we could take back some dignity for the children. Because, you know, the love and marriage of two consenting adults is definitely undignified for the children that are completely unaffected by it. He also authored a bill that, if it had passed, would have given cops the power to act as customs and immigration enforcement agents as well. Because why wouldn't you want a group of people who lack the competence, accountability, and training to fulfill their current job functions to have more job functions they lack the accountability, competence, and training to do? And then in 2010, he ran for state senate and won, and used his newfound position and power to continue being on the wrong side of fucking everything. He opposed the teaching of LGBTQ rights in California public schools, saying that allowing that to happen in schools would be out of touch with mainstream American values. Apparently, 71% of Americans who support same-sex marriage isn't mainstream enough. He opposed the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, which would be an agreement among states to award their electoral votes to whichever candidate won the popular vote, regardless of which candidate won their specific state. If it was instituted, it would effectively give us a national popular vote, which, guess what, is a pretty popular idea. However, Doug thinks that that is dangerous. He says we have the Electoral College and it was put there for a reason. That reason was, of course, to protect slavery. Now it's just there to give people from Wyoming more say than anybody else when it comes to electing presidents, and Doug thinks that's important because it gives his favorite fascists and just politicians with all-around Lamalfa policy platforms the ability to win the White House despite being wildly unpopular. When California was trying to put in a bullet train, he opposed that, saying the numbers just did not work. I'm not exactly sure why that would bother him. Republicans love numbers that don't work, considering they've never been able to balance a budget in the history of fucking ever. And also, investments in infrastructure literally always pay for themselves, but they also help poor people get around, and you can't have that. But in 2012, he decided he was destined for bigger things. I mean, why just try to make people's lives in California worse when you can make all of our lives worse? So he ran for the U.S. House of Representatives, and he has been serving in California's first ever since. This entire time, he's just been a Republic clone, just another shitty Xeroxed copy of all of the MAGA douches in D.C. Once in Congress, he got himself on the Agriculture Committee. Pay no mind to the fact that he still owns a very sizable farm, one he flies home every week from D.C. to run. Certainly no conflicts of interest there. And with his position on the Agriculture Committee in 2013, he passed an amendment that made accessing and processing food stamps more cumbersome. I suppose, though, it makes sense. Being a farmer, he's one of the biggest welfare queens in the country, and he doesn't want to have to compete with poor people eating, because that might eat into the $1.7 million in agricultural subsidies his farm has personally received. He denies climate change, despite there, of course, being overwhelming evidence that it exists, but is absolutely certain that there is overwhelming voting fraud, despite there being no evidence of it whatsoever. Of course, no voter fraud in his districts where he's elected, but in other people's districts where there's people who he doesn't like are elected. That's where there's definitely lots of voter fraud. He sponsored bills that would make the H-1B visa program for high-skilled immigrants more difficult to obtain. He's advocated for charging minors with felonies as adults and building more juvenile detention centers. Because, you know, if you get the child slave labor in the system early, you can really maximize those shareholder returns. He supported the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017 because, you know, when the numbers don't work when it comes to building a bullet train, it's a problem. But if they don't work enough where it's going to add trillions to the national debt, that's some not working he can get behind. He says marriage is an institution created by God and to be respected by men and women. He supported legislation to try to criminalize same-sex intercourse and said same-sex marriage would open the floodgates to legalizing things like polygamy, which you think he'd be cool with because it's like all over in the Bible. And gay marriage has been legal for a while now, so whatever floodgates it opened up must have been holding back reservoirs that were about as wet as the ones in his home state after years of drought that's definitely not caused by climate change because there's been no big push for polygamy. He was caught wiping orange spray tan off of his lips after the 2020 election, claiming that there was widespread election fraud and joining efforts to try to get the election results overturned. He supports the overturning of Roe v. Wade, saying it was a partisan ruling. And of course, he supports banning abortion because it's against American values. 61% of Americans think abortion should be legal. So it's against Americans' values, just not most Americans. He wants to post the 10 Commandments in schools because he's never read the Constitution. He also co-sponsored the Abstinence Education Reallocation Act, which would take sex education money and use it to teach kids nothing. We all know if you want to stop teenagers from having sex, you just tell them, hey, don't have sex. That's why there's no teen pregnancy in the Bible Belt. Also, speaking of being on the wrong side of literally every issue, 96% of Americans support comprehensive sex education in middle and high school. Can we take a moment to just wrap our heads around how shitty your ideas have to be when you're trying to push stuff that 96% of Americans disagree with? Apparently, 25% of Americans still think that the sun revolves around the earth. That means you can find more people to believe that we're still the center of the universe than you can find to believe in Doug's dumb ideas. In fact, Doug's ideas are so dumb and his policies are so unpopular that half the time he can't even get anybody in his own party to agree with him. Like being the only California Republican to vote against aid to Ukraine. So the fact that this guy has been elected so many times kind of makes you wonder if the people of California's first are, all there. But I've got good news for the folks of Northern California. Y'all have the chance to fire this idiot this year. I mean, you've had the chance every 2 years for a long time, and you keep not firing him. But hey, some of us are slow learners. That's okay. But I think you've had enough time to figure it out, and I feel good. This is your year, guys. This is the year to send Doug Lee awful back to the rice field, and you can replace him with a representative that'll make the rest of us judge your decision-making capabilities just a little less. Come on, California's first. You got this.